one last question. I'm trying to understand your logic genuinely. So, you believe, like, because of historical verification and other sources and internal, accuracy and such, that the Gospels are true.
Are historically accurate. That's all. Let's say it all together. Historically accurate. Hey! Some people can listen around here. It's good to see here.
Okay, then, so from the teachings of the Gospels and the teaching of the Gospels spreading the word of Jesus, that word of Jesus that gives you a faith in the teachings of the Old Testament. Yes or no?
No. My experience of the trustworthiness of Christ in my life.
Your life.
In my life.
So it's not the Bible, it's your life. No, now we're changing the story.
I got him. Let me in. Let me in, Coach.
All right, your turn. Oh man!
Here we go, baby. You might get me, but I'm gonna try.
Once again, we're back with the Knechtle duo as they advance on the front lines, having tough conversations with curious, sometimes confused, and sometimes arrogant students. The conversation we are about to witness details a lot about the observational tools experts like Cliffe and Stuart use in order to justify their beliefs in God and the Gospels. Let's take a look.
Quick question. Do you think there's, like, a possibility that what's written in the Bible is not true? Like,
anything's possible. He's a dream. Possible. Anything's possible.
Then outside of the Bible, what is the evidence for us to believe that it's true? Like, everything in it is true. Not anything in the Bible. Outside the Bible, what is there for us to believe that it is true?
First point, I don't assume that every page of any book is all true. Rather, I put together some tests to determine historical credibility, accuracy of manuscript transmission, accuracy of translation.
So, like, the idea that, like, God created everything, that on the first 7 days and such. How do you verify something? Because
it's impossible to verify that.
The Bible told you, correct?
No.
Then why do you believe it?
In Genesis chapter 1, verse 5, the word day, which in Hebrew is yom, refers to a 12-hour period.
I'm not talking about the nuances, but the idea that God created everything, that God created this world, that God exists at all.
Yeah.
You get that from the Bible.
No, sir, I do not. I do not believe that God exists because a book tells me so.
Yeah.
I believe God exists because I observe order and design. And I know that order and design does not come about by chance, because I would have flunked out of Yale.
Okay, then
all right?
How do you
I was not smart enough to go through here, okay? Why? Because I was not able to bring order and design out of the chaos of what was up here.
But how do you know that?
You think there's a God or not?
I think there's some sort of higher power.
Okay. The evidence is that the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are historically reliable.
Aren't those in the Bible?
Yeah?
Okay, I'm talking like outside of the Bible.
Okay, what do you want to know?
Especially on the higher aspects of the Bible, the idea of a higher power and attributing that to the God of the Bible. How do you know that's true? Why do you believe
I was answering your question directly.
Okay.
All right, so you got to slow down.
Okay.
Okay? The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John give us an accurate historical picture of Jesus.
Yeah.
Based on that historical evidence of the trustworthiness of Jesus Christ, I take a step of faith and begin a relationship with Christ. When I experience His trustworthiness in my life personally, I view His statements about the credibility of the Old Testament and His own words as being reliable. So if you die and rise from the dead, I'll listen very carefully to everything you have to say. Does that make sense? That's why I trust Jesus. Does that make sense?
So you trust in the Old Testament because Jesus told you?
No, He didn't tell me to.
No, because
Jesus never talked to me personally, okay?
But Jesus vouched for the
Jesus, exactly. Jesus treated the Old Testament as the Word of God.
And you believe in however many years between now and back then that there was no room for error or inaccuracies in the Bible and other historical texts at all.
Well, of course there have been errors.
So there's mistakes in the Bible. There's inaccuracies in the Bible.
Yeah.
So then how do you know what's true and what's not? How could you...
Because the overwhelming evidence, if you study the issue, is those variations in the original manuscripts in Greek are so small, they don't change anything. It's a question of personal article, impersonal article, singular, plural, repetition of a phrase. Jesus was the son of Mary, who was a virgin in Matthew chapter 1. The discrepancies, the variations in the Greek New Testament
Yeah.
are so small, they don't change nothing.
I'm not even talking about fully discrepancies, but the idea that the Bible was written by humans, right? The Bible was written by humans.
I sure hope it was.
Then how do you know those humans were telling the truth? Like, our entire faith system is based on trust of humans from thousands of years ago. And if they're lying, they're crazy, as you guys are saying, then everything we know crumbles. And the possibility of that exists no matter what.
Yes, that's right. What are your tests that you use to determine historical reliability of any book?
It's as we were talking about before, like the verification of other sources.
Okay, so there are plenty of other documents about Jesus.
Yeah.
Josephus,
Yeah, I'm not talking
Antiquities.
about the existence of Jesus.
Well, then what are you talking about?
I was talking about God as a higher power.
Let's recap the conversation so far, because it's important to address the student's refusal to have a discussion in good faith. Initially, he asked for what evidence there was outside of the Bible to prove that it was true. But before Cliffe had even gotten to answer the question, the student added another question, which was, why does he believe in God? Cliffe then went on to use the teleological argument to explain how it's impossible for life to come from non-life. Then the student reverted to his initial question about the reliability of the Gospels. Cliffe was beginning to answer this question by explaining that the Gospels are reliable and that there were external sources that supported the Gospels, such as the ones provided by Flavius Josephus. But as Cliffe was beginning to expand on this point, the student cut him off and changed the argument, demanding Cliffe account for why he believes the true higher power or true God is the God of the Bible. Cliffe then made a strong case for his belief in the Christian God, and the student oversimplified and reduced Cliffe's argument to, I trust the Old Testament because Jesus told me to. And now the argument has shifted to, how do you know the people who wrote the Bible were telling the truth? As you can see, the student is clearly not willing to have a discussion in good faith, and this begins to irritate Cliffe. But let's continue to see how the rest of this conversation unfolds.
No, sir. Now you're not being fair with me. Now you're being dishonest. I told you flat out, there's no way that a thinking person can believe in God because a book tells you so.
Okay, that's what, and I'm so.
Well, no, you went right back to that. Come on, sir. Are we going to talk right or not?
Yeah.
No, we're not. If you're going to come
I
on.
feel like we're talking.
You're running circles, and that's not fair. We agreed earlier.
Yeah.
I do not believe God exists because a book, the Bible, tells me so.
You believe it because the book told you to believe that Jesus.
No. And I'm going to have to go on to somebody else real soon if we don't start communicating better.
Okay.
Fair enough?
Yeah.
Okay. I believe God exists because the evidence of order and design in creation points to an intelligent mind.
Yeah.
I believe God exists because I experience moral absolutes, which points to a moral lawgiver.
Yeah.
I believe God exists because the evidence is life comes from life, not from non-life.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's more plausible and reasonable for me to believe, in the beginning, a living being created life, not in the beginning, non-life created life. That's why I believe God exists. Has nothing to do with any book. It has to do with an observation of life.
Yeah.
Okay, that's why I believe God exists. Now, why do I believe the Gospels are historically accurate? Because I have tests that I use to determine whether any document that claims to be historical is reliable. My tests are 4. Internal consistency, literary style, archaeological evidence, and manuscript evidence. And the Gospels pass that with flying colors, as does the Quran. If you're going to tell me Muhammad never lived, I'm going to tell you you're wrong. Muhammad was a real historical person.
Yeah.
All right, now are we clear or are we unclear?
Okay. One last question. I'm trying to understand your logic genuinely. So you believe, like, because of historical verification and other sources and internal accuracy and such, that the Gospels are true.
Are historically accurate. That's all. Let's say it all together. Historically accurate. Hey! Some people can listen around here. It's good to see here.
Okay, then, so from the teachings of the Gospels and the teaching of the Gospels spreading the word of Jesus,
Yeah?
that word of Jesus that gives you a faith in the teachings of the Old Testament. Yes or no?
No. My experience of the trustworthiness of Christ in my life.
Your life.
In my life.
So it's not the Bible, it's your life. No, now we're changing the story.
I got him. Let me in. Let me in, coach.
All right. Your turn. Oh, man.
Here we go, baby. You might get me, but I'm going to try.
Before Stuart takes over, let's just look at the tools Cliffe just explained he uses in order to reach the conclusions he does about the existence of God in the Gospels. Firstly, Cliffe explained he believes in God because of the evidence of order and design in creation, which points to an intelligent mind. He then explained he experiences moral absolutes, which point to a moral lawgiver. He then went on to state that the evidence is life comes from life, not from non-life. Done. That was his criteria for belief in a God, no Bible, just based on his observation. In addition to this, Cliffe went on to explain the criteria he uses for believing historical documents, in this case the Gospels. He had 4 tests. Firstly, internal consistency, literary style, archaeological evidence, and manuscript evidence. He stated that the Gospels passed that test with flying colors. And how did the student reply to all this? By dismissing everything he said about how he reaches his conclusions, and instead misrepresented what Cliffe meant by his trustworthiness of Christ. Let's see how Stuart does.
All right, so within the first 100 years after Jesus' life,
Yeah.
25 extra biblical sources we have from Josephus, the Talmud, many others, talking about the whole narrative of the Christian faith. So throw out the Bible, throw out the documents, throw out Christianity. It was all eyewitness testimony from those outside of the Bible, and then these eyewitnesses to the resurrection
Eyewitness
itself.
testimonies could be false.
They can be false. All of history can be false. I'm totally with you. Alexander the Great, everybody could just be false. So why even come and have a history department here?
Yeah.
It all could be false.
That's not the argument I'm making. I'm just saying that, like,
You just said that, though.
okay.
That is the argument you're making. See, you keep, what I hear you keep doing is you keep saying, this is the argument I'm making, but no, as soon as we give you an answer, no, that's not the argument I'm making. That's exactly what I'm hearing every single time. It's being redundant. So what's the argument? Because he just said, the reason why we listen and we think about the Old Testament and work through what is true, metaphorical, literal, what is not, is by looking at Jesus Christ.
My
Yeah.
assertion right now
Yeah.
is not even an active assertion of, yes, the Bible is false, it's all false, because I want to believe it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the idea that me and myself personally, like, I can't reconcile the idea, like, the possibility that, like, all these testimonies, all these eyewitness testimonies, everyone believing in Jesus, that could have been a giant cult back then.
It could have been.
And that everyone was just crazy and believing in that cult.
Could have been.
And
then all of a sudden the early church was built off of this cult that claimed to be overnight believing that a God became human, died, rose from the dead. Then all of a sudden all these Jews who never would have believed in a God who would have actually died on a cross and rose from the dead, they would have been the last ones to believe that. All of a sudden overnight, 2/3 of the Roman Empire became Christian. What's the hoax? What's the hoax? What happened? No. See, if you're going to deny this, you need to tell me, or maybe tonight, come up with it yourself. You need to tell me then what occurred. What occurred? It wasn't the resurrection. So what occurred?
again,
If you don't have a theory and you're coming to a crime scene, bro, if you're coming to a crime scene and I have a theory based off of the evidence I have, and you have no evidence to the contrary whatsoever, you're just saying, it didn't happen, that's weak, man. You should be fired on the spot.
I'm not making an active assertion, and I'm not, like, there's no burden of proof, because I'm not asserting that anything's false or anything. What I'm simply asking is why you believe and how you believe. Because, like, again, back to the whole cult thing, we've seen, like, the idea of a cult.
The Branch Davidians. Absolutely.
Like, seen people,
Jim Jones. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And again, I'm not asserting, yes, this has to be false.
Right.
I'm more asking as someone who wants to believe how I can truly believe with all faith and no doubt.
Absolutely. And so you have to go to Jesus Christ yourself by reading the Gospels, figure out, did he exist? So 98.9% of scholars believe that he existed, right? So we're there with that. Secondly, was his character pure, perfect? He claimed to be God. We expect some pretty good character, right?
Yeah.
What about his sayings? He said these things that were of authority, which meant they transcended even the law at the time that the rabbis were talking about. So his teachings must have been pretty stinking good. Now, what about the resurrection? Well, all scholars, even the most atheistic, will say that there was an empty tomb. That tomb was Joseph of Arimathea's, that the disciples claimed to have had some experience with Jesus, who at first they thought it definitely was not Jesus, but then all of a sudden they claimed to have had experiences that it was, that there was tremendous life change with the top rabbi in the known world at the time, which was Saul. The life change turned to Paul because he had an encounter with the resurrected Christ. And then the church began. And then all of a sudden, 34% of the world became Christian. Now, it could have been, Jesus Christ could have been, like you're saying beautifully, Jim Jones, or he could have been David Koresh, who had these two huge cults. So he claimed to be God. As a mental health therapist, I see a lot of people who claim to be God who are schizophrenics. Many. So Jesus Christ could have been a schizophrenic who pulled off this incredible hoax, and now 34% of the world think he's the Son of God. Could be the case. Could be crazy. Could be the case.
Stewart did a phenomenal job in calling the student out for his refusal to pursue an honest, good faith discussion. The only thing the student was consistent in was changing his arguments, but thankfully he was called out on it. This is what most Christians will encounter when having these discussions, so it is important for the church to stay cool, calm, and collected, and to present arguments to the best of our ability. If people are still not willing to engage honestly, then do as Matthew 10:14 says, which is, if anyone does not welcome you or listen to your words, shake the dust off your feet when you leave that house or town.